looking to get your attention. Exodus chapter 2 relates the birth of Moses and the amazing story of how he was placed in a basket and left in a river to try and escape certain death. He was rescued by Pharaoh's daughter and brought up in Pharaoh's palace. Now, after what would have been a hard start to life, having to be abandoned by his mother, he seems now to be excelling. Everything seems to be going well. He's being treated as an Egyptian prince and as the son of an Egyptian princess. And he would have had everything given to him. Everything he had wanted would have been done for him. He would have lacked nothing. But it doesn't stay that way. You see, Moses is out among his people. And he realizes that he's not an Egyptian, but in fact he's actually Hebrew. And he starts to become more and more concerned about how his people are being treated as slaves. So whilst he's out walking among them one day, he sees an Egyptian savagely beating one of his own, one of the slaves, one of his Hebrew brothers. He was filled with anger, filled with rage, and he doesn't stop because he lashes out and he killed that Egyptian. Now you can imagine when the word reaches Pharaoh of what has happened, Moses is quickly realizing that he's done wrong, that he's in serious, serious danger. So he decides to flee to the Midian desert. Now the Midian desert can be found today in southern Jordan and the northern Saudi Arabia. And if you look at a map, you'll notice that there's quite a distance between Egypt and the Midian desert. And what that tells us is the power of Pharaoh. Moses knew how far Pharaoh's power and his influence must have run. So he decided that for him to get away, he'd need to go a great distance away. That's how scared he was. Can you imagine? In that Midian desert, Moses has went from being in the palace to now walk in a desert on his own. Can you imagine some of the conversations he must have had with himself? Can you imagine what must have been going through his head? He probably thought his life was over. He's being chased by the great Pharaoh and his army. He's in the middle of a desert. Everything he knew was now gone because of that one spur-of-the-moment decision. He was now fearing for his life. And I don't know, are you here today? Can you relate to that in your own life? Or in the life maybe of a loved one? Where life started out great, it started out perfect, and you had big dreams and big plans and you had big ambitions for your life. You were loving life, you were having lots of fun, then things just suddenly changed. You fell into bad company and made some bad lifestyle choices. Maybe you lost your job and started to fall deeper and deeper into depression or into debt. Maybe you made a mistake and lost the respect or love of your family or friends. Or could it be that you feel like you let God down and that you can't get over that? You see, maybe God had given you a dream, a vision, or even a task to do, but after trying to do it on your own, in your own power, in your own strength, maybe now you've given up. I don't know, maybe you've even asked God into your life at one point. But through time and circumstances, you have slipped further and further away from Him. You see, we know God doesn't move. It's us that moves away from Him. If that's you today, can I assure you that it's not too late to do something to start over again? Could it be that God is trying to get your attention right this moment? You see, God has unusual ways of getting our attention. As Alistair read to us, Exodus 3 and verse 2, God uses a burning bush in the middle of a desert to get Moses' attention. When God saw the burning bush, or when Moses saw the burning bush, he was amazed. Amazed. He decided he had to go closer to have a look. God can and may use unexpected sources at unexpected times to communicate to you. It may be family, friends, it can be your thoughts or your experiences, it can be your losses, your successes. But just like Moses, we have to be willing to investigate. We have to be curious, and we have to be open to what God has to say to us. You have to grasp your opportunity when it arrives. In verses 5 and 6, we, like Moses, are given a reminder that although God is our friend, He is also our King. He's our sovereign Lord, and He is worthy of all our praise and worship. We are to approach Him in reverence, as He is a holy God. Moses was reminded that where you stand is holy ground. When we are in the presence of God, a holy God, it's holy ground. Moses was not consumed in his own pity and worries that it would appear that he's now forgotten all about his Hebrew brothers and sisters back in Egypt. He's so caught up in his own self-pity and worthlessness and circumstances, he seems to have forgotten all about what happened back in Egypt. But you know, God hadn't forgotten. Verse 7 tells us that the Lord has heard the cries of bondage and seen the misery and suffering that His people are going through. Not only does He hear and see their sufferings, He's going to rescue them. Now, this is a great reassurance to each one of us that's here today, especially those that are believers here today. If you're a follower of Christ, you're encouraged and reminded that God sees and He hears the sufferings and what you are going through. We don't have a God that's far away. We have a God that's close to us. He sees everything that we are going through. But you know, the good news doesn't stop there. Not only does God not forget about the suffering His people are going through, He also remembers that despite Moses' failure, He's going to choose Moses to be the one to lead the Hebrew slaves out of captivity. Now that's front page news. It really is absolutely amazing stuff. Even after you let God down, even after you do what Moses did or King David did, God can still use you, can still use me. Despite the fact that Moses had sinned, he had lashed out, he had committed murder, God still wanted him. God still had a purpose and plan for his life. Now I want you to visualize this. Can you imagine Moses' reaction? He had spent 40 years in the Midian desert, tending sheep, mulling over all the mistakes he made, the stupid mistake I made changed my life. He thought that he was finished. 40 years in that desert before the burning bush experience and the calling of God. 40 years he waited for that. But you see, it was during that 40 years that Moses was being trained. He was being built up. He was being prepared. He was learning some very important survival skills, which he was going to need as he prepared to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. And you know, in the darkest time in his life, he lost all hope. When nothing seemed to be going right for him, when his dreams had become nightmares, when all he wanted to do was quit, when he was tested to the very, very limits of his being, it was then that he learned some of the greatest lessons of his life. Do you know it's in such lessons that we grow, that we develop and grow strong in our faith? How many of us can relate to Moses' response that he gives to God at this point? We read that Moses starts making excuses to try and wriggle out of it. He's now 80 years of age. Could it be that he's content just to see out the remainder of his days with a quiet life? Maybe he believes he's done all that he has to do in the work of God, and he's going to put the feet up. Could it be that he's scared? The last time he saw Pharaoh wanted him dead. We are told that Moses felt like he was inadequate for the job. And he was right. You see, on his own strength, relying on his own, Moses was inadequate. But God wasn't asking Moses to go it alone. And he doesn't ask us to go it alone. God has blessed each and every person with gifts and talents in this room. Some people step up to the plate and use their gifts and talents. Sadly, some people don't. And when you step up to the plate and use the gifts and the talents from God, he gives you more. But sadly, when you bury the gifts and the talents that he gives you, you get no more. We have to be sold out in our living for God. We have to be prepared to drop everything in serving our God. You see, who God calls, he also equips. He was equipping Moses for all them years in the desert. He equips each one of us in the same way. He takes us aside. It's maybe through them hard times in our life, the times where we maybe think, where is God in all of this? Those are the times that we are growing. And those are the times that God's preparing us. You know, God offered Moses resources. He wasn't going to have to do it alone. He would have the help of Aaron to help him speak. See, Moses said that one of the things he couldn't do is he couldn't speak properly. How can I go and stand before a Pharaoh when I can't speak properly? God gives him Aaron to speak for him. He also has the ability to perform miracles. Something else that God equips him with. We know by our story in our later verses and into the rest of the book of Exodus that Moses goes on in to confront Pharaoh. He goes on to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. He goes on to see the Red Sea part. He sees God feed his people by sending manna from heaven, bread from heaven. He then goes on to receive the 10 Commandments and speak to God face to face. I want you to hear me this morning. This was a murderer. This was a man that committed murder. And God used him for such glory. You see, God often calls us to do tasks that seem difficult or even outside of our comfort zones. But like Moses, he doesn't ask us to do them alone. God will always provide the resources that we need. You know, I've only been here about 4 months on the circuit, and there's still a lot about you as people that I need to get to know. And I'm not sure where you're at, some of you in your life today. I'm not sure if you ever made a commitment to follow Christ. I'm not sure if you once made that commitment, but you now find yourself drifting further and further and further away from God. I'm not sure if you're a Christian here today who started out with those dreams and those passions and those desires to serve God, but now you've given up. Let me tell you what I am sure of this morning. I'm sure of the fact that Jesus loves each and every one of you. And not just does he love you, he wants you to be part of his family. We all want to be loved. We all want to be wanted. And we get that from the great I am. What I am sure of is that God is still in the business of changing lives. God's the same yesterday, today, and forever. He's still in the business of changing lives. What I am sure of is that God sees and he hears your cries. When you're in your room behind closed doors and you're weeping to God, he sees you. He hears you. And he cares for you. So let me ask you a question. Is God looking to get your attention here today? If you have any doubt around that question at all, could I humbly suggest that you follow the example of Moses and put your faith and trust in God today? You won't be disappointed. Amen.